Okay, we have Deepshika and Sherry also. Oh yeah, both of them are there. Okay, wonderful. As we are, running late, so let's get started with the next paper. I'm Tridip Ray of ISI Delhi. The presenter is Deepshika Bateja. So and the discussion, Sherry. Um, so we have. Uh, 30 minutes for the presentation, then 10 minutes for Sherry to discuss, give her comments, and then we have 5 minutes for the, to the floor. So let's get started.
Thank you, Dr. Tridip. I hope you guys can see my screen. The topic, So I'm going to be presenting on gender peer effects in the workplace, and it's a field experiment which I conducted in Indian call centers. So the big picture motivation is that traditional gender norms are likely to increase the cost of hiring women, and female labor force participation rates have been declining in a lot of, have been stagnant in a lot of South Asian countries especially in the last 2 decades. And adverse gender norms and gender segregation practices in these South Asian countries may be further increasing these entry barriers for women, which might make firms skeptical of integrating women into the workplace. So removing these barriers of entry in the workplace will be crucial in boosting the labor supply of women. And therefore, it is important to study gender interactions in the workplace and how it impacts productivity in this setting. So theory provides some guideline on this. So gender diverse teams might have a different productivity than workers in same gender teams. So workers in mixed gender teams might have a decrease in productivity or lower productivity than same gender teams if there is less peer pressure due to less mutual monitoring. This is coming from the social identity literature. Or there could be high transaction costs of interaction due to communication and coordination problems in gender diverse teams, which could be decreasing their productivity. On the other hand, there could be socialization and distraction due to dating because of lack of outside avenues to date, which could cause a decrease in productivity in gender diverse teams. And of course, there can be increases in productivity in gender diverse teams if there is knowledge complementarity and spillovers and their learning benefits.
Sorry, Deepika, your slides aren't moving. Can you, I'm not sure if this is a problem I'm facing. Your slides aren't moving.
I'm moving my slides. Okay, 1 second. I'm so sorry.
Can you make it full screen?
Yes, I did. Okay, 1 second.
Yeah, we can see it better now.
Can you see when I change the slides now?
Yeah, it's fine now.
The research question and then in the previous one, the theory?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so sorry. So the research question that I'm posing in this paper is, does the gender of one's co-worker matter? And specifically, does the gender of one's co-worker impact one's productivity, learning, comfort, gender attitude, job satisfaction, and socialization? So to provide an overview of the experiment, it is the first, in my opinion, is the first, to my knowledge, is the first individual level randomized control trial to study the impact of gender diversity in the workplace on employee productivity. And in this paper, I randomized 765 individual employees into mixed gender teams or control groups of same gender team. And the setting is the call centers in 5 Indian cities. The study period was a median number of 12 weeks. And the main outcome measures that I use at the extensive margin is the share of days worked during the study period. And at the intensive margin is daily level productivity measure. I'm going to elaborate on this in the coming slides. And this data is individual level high quality data, which is internally collected daily by firms using automatic technology. And for behavior and attitude outcomes, I conducted a survey both at baseline and endline. And the measures were gender attitude, job satisfaction, knowledge sharing, dating, peer monitoring, comfort with opposite gender. So you might ask, what is the importance of peers or co-workers in such a setting, in the call center setting? So economic literature provides some evidence that low-skilled or routine jobs, like the ones performed by the call center workers here, have significant and larger peer effects than high skill intensive jobs. In this setting, there is daily interaction with team members in team meetings. So there are these team meetings held at the onset of a day in the morning, and in which they discuss their targets. So there is daily interaction, and it's also standard practice for teams to sit together. And further, at the baseline, when I asked the call center employees whether when they're stuck on calls, who do they ask for help, then 27% of them said that they did ask for their co-workers for help, primarily their co-workers for help when they are stuck on a call. And a large majority of them agreed that they did ask for help, and they learned something from the co-workers sitting nearby. This picture was taken from a male-only team in Patna, and as you can see, they are sitting quite close by. So when they are stuck on a call, of course, the team leader is the person that they're supposed to seek for help. But because they're sitting in such close proximity, they do ask each other for help when they are stuck on a call. So what do I find? For the main outcomes, I find a precisely estimated overall zero effect for both male and female employees on both productivity at the intensive and extensive margins. And on behavior and attitude outcome, I find an increase in knowledge sharing, dating, and comfort with opposite gender in mixed gender teams for male employees. And for female employees, I find an increase in peer monitoring and support when they're assigned in mixed gender teams. And for differential treatment effects on norms, conditional on being assigned to mixed gender teams, men with progressive gender attitudes have significantly higher productivity at the intensive margin than men with regressive gender attitude. And for women with higher autonomy showed up to work more than women with lower autonomy. So this paper contributes broadly to the gender peer effect literature. So the literature is divided into a couple of parts. In some, there's mostly drawn from the management literature. There's a lot of management literature in which they assign, they do group homeworks, and they make mixed gender teams and same gender teams, and they look at group performance on these homeworks given to these management students at the college level. In some, and another thread of literature also looks at school test scores in mixed gender versus same gender classrooms. So they use natural variation in some policy, using some policy in which the classrooms are constructed, which are mixed gender classrooms or same gender classrooms, and they look at individual test scores. And there's also literature which looks at gender composition of boardrooms on firm performance. Here again, they can't look at the individual workers or individual CEOs or board members' contribution. So they look at the firm performance or firm value. This particular paper looks at the gender peer effect in the workplace setting with focus on individual workers' productivity. This paper also contributes to the literature on impact of diversity on employee productivity. So Jort looks at the impact of ethnicity in Kenya on the flour company and productivity of workers. And Lyons looks at the nationality, the effect of people from different nationality and their productivity. This paper looks at gender diversity. There's also some literature which looks at gender attitude, the impact of gender attitude, of gender diverse teams on gender attitude. However, they don't look at productivity. And this paper adds to this literature by studying also productivity as well as gender attitude. So the broader relevance of this paper in terms of policy is that it has implications for firms and workplaces. It provides evidence that it is not costly for firms to hire women, especially in male-dominated workplaces in countries with adverse gender norms. So here the call center industry, relative to other industries in India, yes, they do hire more women, but still it is a male-dominated industry with only 30% of the employees' workforce being female. So, and this call center industry is the largest private sector employer in India. And so it is important for, the results of the study are important for sustainable job creation of many young female workers. It also has policy implication for integrating women into the workplace because it provides supporting evidence to policymakers to boost female labor supply in India. In particular, in the call center industry, the policymakers have a policy which targets, which provides incentives to firms to hire women in call centers under the India BPO promotion scheme. And some of the call centers who were a part of the study were getting some subsidy from the government under this scheme. The call centers, I partnered with 2 call center companies, Call to Connect Private Limited and 5splash Infotech Private Limited. Call to Connect Private Limited, India Private Limited, had centers in Patna, Noida, and Mumbai. And 5splash Infotech Private Limited had centers in Udaipur and Hubli. So these 5 cities are also located in 5 different states. So to give you a background on the call centers, these call center workers who are the subjects of the study are entry-level workers, who are also called agents. They work in teams which is held by team leaders or supervisors. Team leaders supervise a group of 20 to 25 agents. And in this particular paper, I have 5 inbound processes and 5 outbound processes. So 10 processes in total. Processes are businesses. So these call centers work as third-party, they provide third-party help to different companies. So they basically provide either inbound services, which is customer support service, help to incoming calls, where they receive calls. If you make calls for help, they receive those calls. So they are these customer support service representatives. And the other kind of help that they provide is outbound, which is where they make calls to you to make sales. So the advantage of this call center setting was that it is the largest private sector employer in India with hiring about 4 million workers, but it also hires a lot of young workers who have low past exposure to opposite gender. The average age of a worker in this study was around 22 years, and around 30% of the workers in the sample at baseline had not interacted with opposite gender outside of their family while they were in school. So they had low past exposure to opposite gender. There's also productivity measurement advantages because each call that they make or they receive is recorded, and the length of the call, their login hours, all these measures are recorded. So there is technology-based monitoring, which allows for consistent and exact measures of productivity. And because these workers work on a computer, on a desk, and the feature of this call center industry, it also resembles other workplace settings across the world. So I will now explain a little bit about the intervention, the study design. The treatment was of being assigned to a mixed gender team and compared to the control group of all male or all female team. 297 male employees were randomly assigned to mixed gender teams or gender integration treatment arm, and 320 workers were assigned to all male teams or control arm. 67 female employees were assigned to mixed gender teams or gender integration treatment arm, and 81 in all female teams or control arm. There are fewer women in the call centers, and therefore I could only make, so there are fewer women also in the study. There are only 67, in total about 140 women in the study. So these existing employees were aligned to teams for 6 to 14 weeks. And the new hires which joined in this period were randomly assigned to teams, to these mixed gender or control teams. And the seating plan was in a way that there was alternate seating for male and female employees in mixed gender teams. So I'm in mixed gender teams to intensify the exposure, to intensify the treatment or exposure to opposite gender. Males and females were made to sit on alternate seats. And the randomization design, which was followed, was matched pair randomization based on past productivity data to assign individual workers into teams. So the concept of matched pair randomization, as most of us are aware of, is two units are matched on a list of important characteristics, and then one of them is randomly assigned to treatment and the other to control. So in this call center setting, same gender workers belonging to a particular work shift are matched on their average performance. This average performance was based on 3 to 4 weeks of pre-study administrative data. So male members were matched on their past productivity and assigned to either mixed gender or same gender teams, and so were female employees using random number generator. And I also ensured that mixed gender teams had about 30 to 50% female employees. This is a flowchart of the randomization design, which is the ideal design. The total employees, some of them were female, some of them were male, and female employees were then assigned to either female teams or mixed gender teams. And male employees similarly were assigned to mixed gender teams or control group of male teams. But this randomization design could only be followed in 2 processes due to fewer women. So in most cases, this was the flowchart that was, or design that was followed, that the female employees were assigned to mixed gender teams, but there were not enough female employees to have a control group of all female teams. So therefore, there are more males in my study. So then these women who were assigned to mixed gender teams, which were providing treatment to males, were not a part of the study. And the men here were a part of the study. In order to increase knowledge, enhance knowledge sharing, I also conducted a team bonding exercise. So using random, and this was also to intensify the exposure to treatment as well, but it was done in both treatment and control groups both. So using a random number generator, 2 members from a team were chosen to be buddies, and from mixed gender team, opposite gender employees were chosen to be buddies. Each such set of buddies were asked to discuss call quality of 3 pre-assigned calls. So 3 calls were assigned to them on a particular day, and the next day, these 2 buddies were called, and a call quality head was made to sit with them, and they were made to face each other, and they had been given a notebook and a pen in which they had already written on certain parameters on how the call went, and they were then made to discuss the call quality parameters with each other. And this was done for both treatment and control groups. And so the main outcomes that I study at the intensive margin is the daily productivity measure, which is an index of 3 top productivity measure, which was decided after consulting with the call center management as to what was the productivity measure that they cared for the most. So for inbound processes, average call handling time, net login hours, and number of calls answered were the top measures. So in this case, they are receiving calls and are working as customer support service help. So they wanted the workers, these agents, to be there at the call center for as many hours as possible. Their usual shift was of 9 hours, with 8 hours of work and 1 hour of break. So, and then average call handling time, they wanted the call center's workers to wrap up the call usually in a minute and a half. And so they also judged this was an important criteria, average call handling time, and number of calls answered as well. They wanted these workers to handle as many calls as possible and handle as many customer complaints as possible. For outbound processes, the 3 important variables were number of sales made per day. So here they were calling to make sales. So of course, the sales made per day was important, but the efficiency was also important as to how many sales they could convert in the number of calls. So they did not want them to waste a lot of calls while converting these sales. So number of sales by calls made was also important, and number of calls made was also important. So I created an index of these 3. Share of days worked during study period, which is the measure at the extensive margin, was a ratio of days present in the study period by number of days of the study. So if the study went on for 60 days, if you showed up to work on 30 days, then it was a fraction of a half. But of course, I adjusted for the employee's starting date. So in a way, this was a measure, combined measure of attendance and retention. For behavior and attitude outcomes, for gender attitude, it was an index which is comprised of 25 questions on attitudes, on education, on gender attitude based on education, employment, fertility, and gender roles. And job satisfaction is an index of 3 questions on emotional exhaustion due to work. And knowledge sharing was an index of 2 questions on whether they learned something from the coworker sitting nearby. Peer monitoring and comfort was an index of 5 questions on whether they felt comfortable in the team, whether they thought they got some performance feedback from their workers, from their teammates, and so on. Dating was just 1 question on whether they were currently dating or not. And comfort with opposite gender at workplace used responses on whether employees are comfortable receiving feedback in front of opposite gender co-workers. And these survey responses from both baseline and inline were used. And this was a computer-based survey administered in the call center under supervision. So either I was present or somebody from my research team was present at the site. The empirical specification that is used I use intent to treat effects using ANCOVA specification. I have daily productivity measures, so use ANCOVA specification. So the outcome is measured for individual I, who is assigned to team or group G at strata S and at time or date T. And it's regressed on gender integration treatment, which is whether you are assigned to mixed gender team. So you got a value of 1. And if you are assigned to control group, you got the value of 0. And outcome, I also control for baseline productivity measure, which is the pre-administrative data. And for some workers who joined the study after the study had started, there was a new batch. So there was no baseline productivity data available. So I controlled for that as well. I controlled for strata, which is the lowest level of or lowest unit of randomization. So in most cases, it was because the matched pair randomization, it was the pair, which was the unit of randomization. But for new batches or new groups of people which were hired, shift or batch or process was the lowest unit of randomization for those workers. And I controlled for date fixed effects. Standard errors are clustered at the team or group level. There were 38 clusters or teams for male agents and 8 clusters for female employees. So I'm going to show you the pre-intervention balance check on individual characteristics. So as you can see, males who were assigned to mixed gender teams and males who were assigned in control group in the pre-intervention, it's balanced on individual characteristics of age, education, whether they attended government school, urban, they went to urban, they had urban residence, past exposure, experience, and so on. And similarly for female employees. But you can notice that female employees are slightly more older, more educated, and more urban, and have a higher experience as well. And there are about 150 women in the study and 617 men in the study. And to show you the pre-intervention balance check on baseline productivity for both male and female, they are balanced on productivity. So this is the result on the main productivity outcome of both at intensive and extensive margins of productivity. So as we can see, these are close to 0 effect, and because the null value lies in the tight bounds around the point estimate within the confidence interval. That's why I say that these are precisely estimated 0 effect of being assigned to mixed gender teams for both male and female employees for both share of days worked and daily productivity measure. So I'm going to, so this effect of minus 0.008 is quite close to 0, and the standard error is 0.023, and it lies minus 0.008, and the confidence interval around it is minus 0.037 to 0.053, in which the null value also lies, and these are very tight bounds. And similarly, for female agents also, you see the null value lies in the confidence interval around the point estimate within minus 0.074 to 0.09. So, and similarly for the productivity z-scores as well. So now I'll move on to the impact of treatment on behavior and attitude outcomes. So the gender integration treatment is expected to improve gender attitudes. Some papers do find that there's an improvement in gender attitude when in gender diverse rooms, like bunk beds and like those military rooms. Dahl et al. Find that there is, because there's a breakdown of stereotypes, and there's which encourages and encouragement, and it encourages understanding amongst the opposite gender. So it is expected that gender integration treatment here as well would improve the gender attitude in gender diverse teams. Gender integration treatment could have a positive or negative impact on job satisfaction. Workers might be more stressed around opposite gender teammates, especially in this kind of environment where there is low past exposure to opposite gender, or they might be happier sitting next to opposite gender co-workers because of lack of outside avenues to date. And because they might be learning from their opposite gender peers as well. Gender integration treatment is also expected to have a positive impact on knowledge sharing due to mutual learning, and a positive effect on dating and socialization due to increased interaction with opposite gender. So then what do I find? I don't find anything significant for gender attitude, even the coefficient is quite large, but I don't find anything on gender attitude or job satisfaction. But I find on the index of knowledge sharing that there's a 0.3 standard deviation increase in knowledge sharing reported by men who were assigned to mixed gender teams relative to those assigned to control group of all male teams at the inline. These are huge effects, and the dating also, the self-reported increase in dating as well for mixed gender team relative to control group of male team, which is a 19 percentage point increase in dating, which is around 38% increase in dating for men who are assigned to mixed gender teams. And they also report that they were comfortable sitting and receiving feedback in front of opposite gender peers, which was a concern in the call centers. And it is an increase of 0.05 standard deviation. For women, I find that the peer monitoring and support, they report that they got more support from opposite gender.
You have 5 minutes.
Yes, okay, thank you. So the peer monitoring and support, there's a 0.02 standard deviation increase in peer monitoring and support. So they do report that they were comfortable sitting next to opposite gender peers, and they did receive feedback on their performance from their male colleagues. They were assigned to mixed gender teams. So who benefits most from treatment? Workers with low or high prior exposure to opposite gender. So it was an index of questions on interaction with opposite gender in high school, neighborhood, whether they had dated earlier, whether even at the workplace they had had lunch with opposite gender peers. So I expect that workers with high prior exposure will have higher productivity due to lower psychic cost of interaction with opposite gender. Workers with initial progressive or regressive gender attitude. What I expect is that individuals with progressive gender attitude will perform better due to lower cost of interaction with opposite gender, and women with lower or higher autonomy. This is measured on, at baseline on questions on women's decision-making power about her own life, about what clothes to wear, who she goes out with, about how her earning is spent. So I expect that women with higher autonomy will have higher productivity when assigned to mixed gender teams. So the differential treatment effects on norms, I don't find anything for male agents, but for female agents, I do find on share of days work during study period, I find that women with lower autonomy showed up to work less by minus 0.2 percentage points, less to work. than women who were assigned to female-only teams. And when I look at the differential treatment effect on norms on productivity, I find for male agents, I find that men with regressive gender attitudes had lower productivity than men with progressive gender attitudes at baseline, conditional on being assigned to mixed gender teams. I don't find anything for female agents. So the summary is that this paper tested the effect of gender integration in the workplace on individual employees' productivity, and I find no evidence on any impact on productivity for both male and female employees, both at the extensive and intensive margins. It does provide evidence of knowledge sharing among employees. Male employees learned more from female co-workers. It also showed that there is an increase in comfort within teams for female employees in mixed gender teams. And there is evidence of dating and socialization for male employees. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful, Deepshika, the perfect with time. Yeah, so could I invite Sherry, Professor Sherry Lee, to give her comments? Will you share your screen?
Yes, I'll do that right away. Thank you very much for inviting me to discuss this very interesting paper. Let me just go ahead and share my screen with you guys. Please let me know whether you can see my slides or my slides were transitioning.
Yeah, it's fine. Just make it full screen, yes.
All right. It's a highly interesting paper. I really enjoyed reading it, and it has very important policy relevance. So the experiment, the RCT study, was very well designed and implemented, and the author has, a very rich data set, including pre and post surveys, and, very rich information in administrative data set on daily performance by, close to 800 workers. And I really like the paper. It's well polished. So it just some comments. My comments will focus on basically the analysis, and also, let me see what's going on here. Let me close that. My comments will be focused on analysis and on the results, and to what extent the results might be related to specifically to the workplace setting in the RCT study. The study, to my best knowledge, was pre-registered at the AEA registry. It's unclear, however, in the paper, which parts of the analysis are pre-registered or which parts are extended analysis. I think it would be very helpful if the author could add more clarification in the paper. And also, so the analysis now is done on the level of daily observations of each worker, because initially I was a little surprised to see the number of observations. For example, in some of the columns, you had more than, for example, 43,000 data points. So now I realized that, the observations were based on the daily observations by each individual worker. I was wondering whether the results are robust. I'm not questioning the robustness of results. I'm just saying, and you would be very likely to be asked by the referees to show some robustness checks to see whether your results are basically unchanged. One robustness check you may look into is the individual worker level analysis. And some more comments on the analysis. I really like the very rich set of data that you have. But again, to my best understanding, many of these variables are not incorporated in the analysis for some reasons. Maybe you have, maybe I overlooked something, and correct me if I'm wrong. I would, for example, look into some of the variables. And I'm not saying you should do all this. I'm just saying, again, there seems to be a good amount of heterogeneity, variation along these dimensions you may want to look into. Demographics, maybe for the old batches, the gender composition of their past teams, to get readers some ideas about the impact of the past experience about, with the opposite gender group on their performances. And you also had old and new workers. I was wondering whether the results were, for example, robust to, the old workers, because for new workers, it did not have any of the observations about their past performance. What about the sex of the team leader in the mixed teams? It doesn't matter. You also have, a good variation, I think, in terms of duration of the experiment. It varies from 6 to 14. And in your talk, you mentioned the median was 12, if I remember correctly. And I'm not sure the gender composition of the mixed teams was always balanced. And I went to look for the information in the paper a couple of times. So my best understanding was in some of the groups, mixed teams, yes, that was the case, but in some of the other teams, I didn't mention. And you also had fixed versus flexible seatings. Anyways, and you had multiple locations in which where you conducted a study, maybe the local culture and gender equality will matter. So all I'm suggesting is, do some robustness checks. I really like the analysis. I think it's thoroughly done. It's a little thing, however, I think, in these days, I think a referee will ask you for tons and tons of robustness check. So you may consider, for example, doing the robustness checks, adding some control variables I mentioned, or maybe you want to show the results hold for some of the subsamples, for example, old and new batches, etc. I don't know whether you will be having enough observation to do the last one. So I was just curious while I was reading the paper on how well the mixed gender teams perform on average relative to homogeneous gender teams. The analysis, as you mentioned in the talk and the paper as well, were focusing on the individual workers' productivity. But a natural question to ask, maybe it's highly relevant for the management, is, on average, how well the mixed gender teams would perform relative to the counterparts. Let's see. This is basically my last one. So I think the results were very encouraging. And the main result basically is being assigned to a mixed gender team has zero impact on the productivity and share of days worked during the study, the intensive and extensive margins. And also, I think the workplace setting is pretty unique. I agree with you on, why it's important and relevant to study this kind of workplace. But when you look at the characteristics of the workplace, these are the individual-based workplace with, relatively speaking, limited interactions among workers, right? They do interact, they sit very closely, as you show in the picture. I found it was very helpful. The workers were paid with fixed payment, and the workers' performance does not really directly affect each other's performance versus pay. I was wondering to what extent is these characteristics actually are related to the null result. That was basically the main finding of the paper. In other words, how important do the above characteristics impact the main result? Or put in differently, to what extent do you expect the null result will vary, maybe in some degrees, in somewhat different workplaces? So I think more discussions will be helpful. I'm not suggesting you run more experiments. I'm just suggesting, adding some more discussions, your insights or maybe discussions from the literature will be very, very helpful. This is just a very quick minor things, right? Group composition, I mentioned this, and I found the paragraph, the second last paragraph on page 12 on standardization of the productivity measure, a little unclear. It was very concise with 2 or 3 sentences, but I like to have a little more details on that. So this is what I have. Thank you very much again. Very interesting paper. I really enjoy reading it. Highly recommend it to everyone.
Thank you so much, Professor Lee. This is all very useful comments. Yes, this is at a working stage. So that's why, this kind of feedback on robustness checks and all is very helpful, because that's going to be my next plan of action anyway. So the only question, everything was mentioned in the, I had written a pre-analysis plan and presented to my committee and people in UC Riverside, where I graduated from. AE registry also mentions so whatever I presented is mentioned in the AE registry. The only additional question that I asked was comfort with opposite gender, because the call centers, in the due course of the study, the call centers were very wary of the fact that they might not be okay receiving feedback from in front of opposite gender peers, because this also links to your later point on why will there be any variation in productivity if it's not linked to their pay, because the team leaders, if you don't perform, if you don't achieve your targets, the team leaders will come and scold you, nudge you, scold you, and in front of your coworkers. So it does matter, like there in terms of status, and if you're sitting next to women, especially for men, for both genders actually. So that's why they were also wary of the fact that men might not be very receptive. So that's why I added that one question on comfort with opposite gender and receiving feedback in front of opposite gender. That was the only question that was added apart from what was registered. And that's why I did not look at the demographics and like the heterogeneity analysis that you're asking me, because I thought I have not presented not mentioned it in my pre-analysis plan. But yes, of course, I will also look at those variables. And on the overall productivity of the employees, and not only at the daily level, but the overall productivity, it was robust. I did look at the results, and it holds. And yeah, and I will also look at I do the robustness checks that you have asked me for, and I'm going to write to you after this, and then maybe you can share your slides with me. And the local culture and gender equality, this was a question that was has been asked, but because I do collect information on gender attitude, I expect the local culture to be reflected in those questions. So that's why when I look at the differential impact on norms, I expect that result to tell me about the local culture as well. So to incorporate that. So that's how I have incorporated that, because as you said, the data set already asks these questions. In terms of yeah, and I will also look at the overall productivity of mixed and homogeneous. I think I've looked at it at some point, but I don't remember now. And the standardization of productivity measures, I will surely include. That is a great tip, that if it was not very clear, then I can of course include that in more detail in the paper. Thank you so much for your comments.
Well, thank you very much for your responses, Deepshika. It's very impressive work.
Okay, wonderful. We have about 5-6 minutes for discussion. So Sonia has a question, then Sheetal. So Sonia, why don't you go ahead, and then Sheetal next.
Okay, thank you, Trideep, and hello. Thank you, Deepshika. I enjoyed the paper very much. Very nicely done. I just have a couple of questions about productivity. Sorry if you showed me, but I wondered if you did show us how much productivity varies. The reason I'm asking, what is the variation in productivity within a call center? The reason I'm asking is, I wonder if the fact that you don't find anything might be because it cannot vary very much because by construction. And I also, so these are all related questions. I'm trying to understand what's happening in the call center. So if a call comes through and I'm on it for a long time, because I'm handling it well and it's a long call, then someone else will take it on. So if one employee spends a long time on the phone, it's more likely that subsequent calls go to other people. So there's a relationship between the length of the call and the number of calls you complete. And I think you know where I'm going. So if you could just explain that a bit more. Yeah, sorry. Maybe I'll stop there and then follow up if I understand better.
No, thank you, Dr. Sonia, for your question. Yes, I think I need to include a table which shows the min-max, mean, standard deviation, the whole summary stats of each of the productivity variables, because there is variation in the productivity variable in each of the individual productivity variables. I don't know, like, so even for net login hours, for example, it is anywhere from 4 hours to 9, 10 hours, 10, 12 hours. So there is a lot of variation. So therefore I feel, and I do find for other, like for regressive gender attitude and for other things, I do find some significance. So it's not as if, there is, and I also use this data to look at for another paper which looks at the effect of pollution on productivity, and I do find some significance there. So I think if I include, I think that would solve the problem, I guess, if I include the min, max and mean and standard deviation for each of the productivity variables.
Yeah, and whether the mean and standard deviation are different for men and women, just taken alone.
Yeah. For men and women. Yes, of course. So at the baseline, women had slightly higher productivity than men had. So therefore, when we see the effect on the increase in knowledge sharing for men, that makes sense, because men seem to be learning from the women who are, in most processes, in like 6 or 7 of the 10 processes, women had high productivity at the baseline. But yes, I can include that one table. So thank you for your suggestion.
So I think I wasn't very clear with my question about the length of the call and it spilling over to the next person. I think what I was trying to ask is whether it's a zero sum, in the sense that a call center takes calls between 9 and 5 or some fixed time. If you spend longer, you take fewer calls, as fixed number of workers. So I'm wondering what productivity means.
Yes. So for incoming calls, they are supposed to handle the call in a particular time. So in my paper, I have taken average call handling time as a negative measure. So the more time you spend on the call, it's a negative productivity actually. So the less number of time taken for a call is better. Of course, not zero, but the lesser amount is better. And of course, the higher number of calls that you, as a person who is taking calls, the higher number of calls that you take and resolve is better for the call center. So that is also taken into consideration. And net login hours. So the more number of hours you sit at the call center, the more customers you handle. So it's an index of all of these variables. And for sales, you can be on the call for as long as you want, as long as you achieve a particular sales target. So if you are supposed to achieve 20 in a day, so they want you to achieve 20, but also, and better than 20 is great as well. And not everyone achieves 20, by the way. So there is variation. But also efficiency matters. So how many calls did you make to get that 20 sales? So that's why I've included the sales, like efficiency also, sales by calls per day. So okay. I hope that it's a consolidated measure. It's an index. So it takes into account all the concerns that you have.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Sheetal, your question.
Separately, but I should let the next speak.
Yeah,
Deepshika, again, these are not questions, these are also comments. Which is just, these came up already, Sherry and Sonia already mentioned this, but I'm just going to echo this and then say it a little bit differently. I think that, you're mentioning teams and so on, but when we think of teams, we think of the production process having, effects on team members. So my productivity affects somebody else's productivity. But in this case, it seems like the production process is such that my productivity doesn't necessarily affect yours. And that's what Sonia was trying to get at. So please explain to us what the production process is. Why does it matter to be in a team, and what are the incentives? So you need to clarify that. But in your setting, it seems like, it's not really about team production. It's about, exposure to these other types of maybe males and females, and maybe how do you feel when you receive feedback in front of them. So it's more sort of a exposure than a team performance kind of experiment that you have, or so the setting you have. So I would say that you should sort of package it in that manner, related to this Dahl's literature about exposure and Dahl's paper, Dahl et al.'s paper, etc., about exposure, not so much as team production or performance, unless there are reasons to expect that my productivity might affect yours. And, are women sort of better at attending calls? Are they slow talkers? Do they spend more time? These are the things you need to ex ante explain to us by way of thinking about understanding your context a little bit more. So I would highlight the things that you have, buried in the heterogeneous analysis a little bit more, and spin this paper more as a paper about how social norms matter for or play a role in mitigating these exposure type of experiments or settings as well. So I'll probably stop here, but I think that's where most of these comments are also going. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sheetal, for your question. Can I take that? Yeah. So the gender, it is an externality problem, that because they are not making something together. So it is an externality problem that, and the gender peer effect or peer effect literature is about that, whether you see a worker who is from a different race and how does it impact you? And then these are the different mechanisms or channels through which it could impact your productivity. So of course, there could be like that kind of stress as you are, social norms or these other things that can impact. But of course, like because they're sitting so close to each other, and as I mentioned, they could be learning from each other directly as well. When they're stuck on a call, it's because they do approach each other for help. And they are working on like 6 days a week with each other. So of course the team members and how the calls gets divided amongst these team members also matters. So my productivity might also have an impact on the other person's productivity. As I said, if I spend too much time on a call, so then that calls get routed to another person who's within my team. So teams do matter in this kind of a setting through this factor also. And of course, because they are sitting with each other, there is that spillover effect as well. But yes, I mean, your comments are appreciated, and like I'm going to think more about them, Dr. Shekhar.
Yeah, I believe in the interest of time, let's stop here today for this session. There are some more questions. So Swati had a question. I'd like to request you to, so there'll be a breakout session at the end after the next presentation. So please ask if there are more questions there.